Did you know that one mistake could cost millions of lives? In this story, the USA decided the fate of the war in just a few days. If you're interested in the truth about World War II, subscribe and hit the like button. There are many shocking facts ahead. November 13th, 1942, 01:48 hours. On the bridge of the destroyer Amatsukaze, amidst the dark expanse of Ironbottom Sound, Commander Tameichi Hara gripped the railing, his knuckles white. Above him, star shells tore through the night sky, painting the deck in stark, unforgiving light. For 2 decades, the Imperial Japanese Navy had honed night combat into a finely tuned art, a deadly ballet of ships, torpedoes, and trained eyes. Yet here, in the pitch-black waters of the Solomons, all that mastery seemed suddenly fragile. American shells rained down before Hara's lookouts could even glimpse the flash of enemy guns. Through the bridge windows, he saw a truth that defied 20 years of doctrine. Enemy vessels firing with mechanical precision from distances exceeding 10,000 yards, utterly invisible, unannounced by searchlights or star shells. The USS Helena, guided by radar, had found Amatsukaze, and when Hara, clinging to old habits, kept his searchlights on too long in a desperate bid to locate his assailants, 6-inch shells tore through the destroyer, killing 43 of his men in an instant. 3 kilometers away, the battleship Hai, proud veteran of Pearl Harbor, shuddered under fire from phantom attackers. Her lookouts saw nothing, yet the enemy's shells struck with terrifying accuracy. What the Japanese officers did not yet grasp was that they were witnessing the debut of the SG Surface Search Radar, a technology that would, within 18 months, obliterate Japan's hard-won advantage at night. The calculus of defeat was no longer in lost ships or conquered islands. It was in the sudden, brutal irrelevance of 20 years of doctrine, training, and strategy, built upon one unwavering assumption, that the Imperial Navy ruled the darkness. Japan's supremacy in night warfare had roots stretching back to the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905. At the Battle of Tsushima, Admiral Togo's torpedo boats had shredded the Russian fleet under the cover of night, a victory that became sacred canon for Japanese naval doctrine. By 1942, this philosophy had blossomed into the most sophisticated night fighting system in the world. Sailors trained relentlessly in darkness. Lookouts underwent specialized regimens to enhance their night vision, spending hours in blackened rooms, avoiding vitamin A deficiencies, and practicing distance estimation under minimal light. On a moonless night, the average Japanese lookout could identify a ship's silhouette at 7,000 meters, twice the range of his American counterpart. Technology reinforced this belief. While American captains relied on primitive radar, they barely trusted Japanese optics led the world. Nippon Kogaku binoculars, soon to be known as Nikon, offered extraordinary magnification and light-gathering power. The Type 93 long-lance torpedoes could strike at 24,000 yards, far beyond the reach of any American detection at night. The early months of the Pacific War seemed to validate every assumption. At the Battle of Savo Island on August 9, 1942, Japanese cruisers obliterated an Allied force in 33 minutes, sinking 4 heavy cruisers without losing a single ship. On November 30th, 1942, a lone Japanese destroyer squadron would wreak havoc on a superior American cruiser force, sending 4 ships to the depths in minutes. Yet across the Pacific, a quiet revolution was underway in American shipyards and laboratories. The SG Surface Search Radar, developed under the MIT Radiation Laboratory and the Naval Research Laboratory, marked a leap that would eclipse the primitive sets that had failed at Savo. Operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength with 50 kilowatts of power, the SG radar could detect a destroyer at 15 nautical miles and aim guns for blind fire at 10. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, founded in November 1940, had swelled to nearly 4,000 employees by 1943. Its foundation was a cavity magnetron delivered by the British Tizard mission in September 1940, a device historian James Finney Baxter III would call the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores. This breakthrough allowed the production of roughly 1,000 SG radar sets during the war. The first Fletcher-Class destroyer, USS Fletcher, DD-45, commissioned June 30, 1942, carried this revolutionary system as standard. By November, she patrolled the Solomon Islands, the only Fletcher-Class destroyer present at the naval battle of Guadalcanal. The Planned Position Indicator, or PPI scope, offered a godlike view of the battlefield, displaying every contact on a circular screen that refreshed every 2 seconds. For the first time, American gunners could fight with sight beyond sight, striking in darkness with an accuracy that would shatter Japan's carefully cultivated supremacy. American radar operators could do the unthinkable, distinguish ship classes by their radar echoes, track the fleeting trails of torpedo wakes, even spot submarines skulking at periscope depth. The system functioned flawlessly in daylight or darkness, in storms or calm, through smoke and fog alike. SG radar was not merely a detection tool. It was fully integrated with the Mark 37 gun director, linked to an analog computer capable of calculating firing solutions in seconds, automatically compensating for target speed, course, wind, and the roll of the firing ship. The standard 5-inch, 38 caliber guns of the Fletcher-Class destroyers could unleash 15 to 20 rounds per minute, now guided with deadly precision by radar. The night of November 12, 1942 would shatter long-held Japanese assumptions. The naval battle of Guadalcanal ignited when Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan's task force intercepted Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe's bombardment group advancing toward Henderson Field. While only the USS Fletcher represented her revolutionary destroyer class, several other ships, including USS Helena, carried SG radar. At 0124, Helena's radar picked up Japanese vessels at an astonishing 27,000 yards, far beyond anything human eyes could perceive. For the next 20 minutes, American radar operators tracked the Japanese force relentlessly, while Japanese lookouts strained uselessly into darkness, blind to the invisible threat. Chaos ensued. American radar-directed fire tore through Japanese formations before they could bring their vaunted night-fighting tactics to bear. The destroyer Akatsuki, poised for her specialized torpedo assault, was caught in crossfire from multiple American ships. In minutes, she erupted in flames and sank. Commander Hara on Amatsukaze faced this new reality directly. His ship torpedoed USS Barton, splitting her in half, and crippled USS Juno. Yet when he illuminated USS San Francisco with searchlights to aid his gunnery, Helena's radar-directed guns instantly pinpointed Amatsukaze, inflicting severe damage and heavy casualties. The battleship Hai, flagship of Admiral Abe, became a magnet for American radar fire. Concealed by darkness and rain squalls that should have offered cover, she absorbed 85 shell hits from guns firing beyond Japanese visual range. Her bridge was obliterated, steering ruined superstructure ablaze. By the next day, Hai would be scuttled, the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. Through late 1942 and early 1943, the disparity between American and Japanese night-fighting capabilities became undeniable. SG radar, operating at 3 gigahertz with 50 kilowatts of peak power, could detect destroyers at 15 nautical miles with astounding accuracy, plus to 40 yards in range and plus to 0.5 degrees in bearing. Weighing just 1,000 pounds with 95% operational availability, it was ideal for wide deployment. By contrast, the Japanese Type 22 radar, operating at 150 megahertz with 2 kilowatts of peak power, could detect destroyers at 10 nautical miles only under perfect conditions, with plus 300 yards in range and plus 5 degrees in bearing. At 200 pounds and only 40% operational availability, it was bulky, unreliable, and often failed entirely. Of the first 60 Type 22 sets, only 6 actually worked. Japanese radar production during the entire war reached roughly 300 units, less than a third of American SG output alone. This technological gap reflected deeper structural flaws. Japan had produced cavity magnetrons as early as 1937, and Dr. Hidetsugu Yagi had invented the directional antenna in 1926. Yet military leadership barred Yagi from radar work. When Japanese forces captured British radar with Yagi antennas, they failed to recognize it as a Japanese invention. Rivalries between Army and Navy further crippled coordination, resulting in separate, incompatible radar systems. The consequences were tangible. During the Battle of Vella La Vella on October 6-7, 1943, USS Selfridge detected and tracked Type 93 torpedoes with radar, evading weapons that had previously been fatal. Fletcher-Class destroyers were no longer merely observers, they commanded the night. The Tokyo Express, Japan's famed high-speed resupply runs to Guadalcanal, had relied entirely on Japanese night superiority. Even the finest captains, like Captain Raiso Tanaka of the 2nd Destroyer Squadron, began suffering losses as radar-equipped Americans intercepted them. Tanaka, writing in 1956 in the U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings, acknowledged that darkness no longer protected Japanese ships, despite his tactical brilliance. By early 1943, American destroyers could intercept Tokyo Express missions in total darkness, through rain and squalls, firing first, firing accurately, and chasing Japanese forces even at full speed. On November 25, 1943, this shift became undeniable. 5 destroyers under Captain Arleigh Burke intercepted 5 Japanese destroyers off Cape St. George. In a running battle fought entirely by radar, Burke's squadron sank 3 Japanese ships, Onami, Makinami, and Yugiri, without sustaining serious damage, while the Japanese never achieved visual contact with their attackers. This engagement marked the last major surface action in the Solomon Islands and the end of significant surface combat in the area. By mid-1943, Japanese commanders struggled to adapt. The death of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto in April removed the leader most capable of grasping the implications of American technological superiority. Japanese attempts to counter radar, such as deploying aluminum Givenchy strips, proved futile. Their radar development lagged years behind, hindered by inter-service rivalry and resource scarcity. Commander Tameichi Hara, the only IJN destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor to survive the war, later recounted in his memoir, Japanese Destroyer Captain, the grim realization among Japanese officers that their night-fighting expertise had become obsolete. Despite some factual errors, Hara's assessment of American technological dominance was spot on. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay on November 2, 1943, would provide the clearest demonstration of this transformation. Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill's Task Force 39, including several Fletcher-Class destroyers equipped with the latest SG radar modifications, intercepted a superior Japanese force under Rear Admiral Sentaro Omori. At 00.27 hours, the radar screen lit up with contacts at 35,900 yards, giving the Americans an almost supernatural tactical advantage. For the next several hours, American ships tracked the approaching Japanese force with unerring clarity, maneuvering into optimal firing positions while remaining ghosts on the horizon, invisible to the eyes of Japanese lookouts. What unfolded seemed magical, even impossible, to the Japanese sailors. Ships engaged at distances exceeding 14,000 yards in total darkness, striking with their first salvos. They tracked and evaded long-lance torpedoes by following their wakes on the radar screen, then counterattacked the launching destroyers without ever seeing them. The psychological shock reverberated through the Japanese high command. Despite superior numbers and firepower, Rear Admiral Omori's force was routed, losing the light cruiser Sendai and the destroyer Amatsukaze, while inflicting only negligible damage. Historian Samuel Eliot Morison would later note that this battle marked the definitive end of Japan's night-fighting supremacy. The impact on Japanese morale was profound. Men who had spent years mastering night combat watched helplessly as their skills were rendered obsolete by technology. Operational reports documented the frustration. Long-lance torpedoes, launched with carefully calculated radar-assisted estimates, increasingly struck only empty water. Elite crews who had once prided themselves on dominating the night found themselves powerless against an enemy they could neither see nor anticipate. The Fletcher-Class destroyer program epitomized American industrial might. Between 1942 and 1944, U.S. shipyards produced 175 Fletcher-Class destroyers, more than Japan built of all types during the entire war. Each ship carried radar systems far superior to anything in the Japanese fleet. SG radar sets were churned out by Western Electric, Westinghouse, and General Electric at a pace that bewildered Japanese planners. The magnetron tubes, at their core impossible for Japan to manufacture reliably, were mass-produced in American factories. By war's end, the United States had produced over 100,000 radar sets of all types. The gap went far beyond sheer numbers. American radar improved continuously throughout the war. The SG system evolved through multiple versions, each iteration extending range, accuracy, and target discrimination. By 1944, American destroyers could detect a surfaced submarine at 18 miles and track a periscope at 3. Meanwhile, Japanese radar development stagnated. By August 1943, the Naval Electrical Research Department had only 300 staff, compared with MIT Radiation Laboratory's 4,000. Japan lacked both the necessary materials and the electronics industry to support rapid innovation. As radar neutralized traditional night-fighting tactics, the Imperial Navy was forced to rethink its doctrines. Orders from Combined Fleet Headquarters began openly acknowledging American radar superiority, advocating radical maneuvers and an acceptance of higher casualties. The Navy that had once hunted at night now actively avoided combat under cover of darkness. When forced into action, they executed operations knowing severe losses were almost inevitable, hoping only to achieve torpedo launch positions. Training programs scrambled to adapt. At the Yokosuka Torpedo School, blind launch techniques were attempted firing torpedo spreads without visual confirmation, but success rates remained painfully low. The Naval War College even developed night-fighting doctrines predicated on accepting catastrophic casualties. Japan's submarine fleet, initially less affected by radar, soon encountered its reach. Fleet submarines attempting to recharge batteries on the surface at night discovered that darkness no longer offered sanctuary. SG radar could detect a surface submarine at more than 15 miles far beyond visual range, even by day. Submerged transit speeds dropped from 15 knots to 3. Battery life restricted underwater endurance to hours instead of days. American destroyer escorts, guided by radar, hunted Japanese submarines with ruthless efficiency. In May 1944, USS England sank 6 Japanese submarines in 12 days, all first detected by radar. By late 1944, Japanese submarine losses were catastrophic. Japanese officers drew a stark psychological parallel. Just as American B-29 bombers struck from altitudes beyond interceptor reach, American destroyers now attacked from beyond visual range. Technology created a sanctuary from which the enemy could strike with impunity. Traditional warrior skills, courage, training, spirit meant nothing against an invisible adversary who could engage without risk. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 offered the ultimate confirmation of radar's transformative power. The largest naval battle in history became a demonstration of technological mismatch. On October 25th, during the Battle of Samar, USS Johnston, under Commander Ernest Evans, engaged Japanese battleships in rain squalls and smoke, relying entirely on radar-directed fire. Despite being vastly outgunned, American destroyers and destroyer escorts coordinated attacks through conditions that blinded Japanese optical rangefinders. Japanese ships resorted to color-coded shell dye Yamato, used white, Nagato brilliant pink, Haruna greenish yellow, Congo blood red, so spotters could identify shellfall, a labor-intensive workaround highlighting their lack of radar. In contrast, American radar-controlled automatic fire systems required no such tricks. In Surigao Strait, American destroyers launched coordinated torpedo attacks entirely beyond visual range, guided solely by radar. By now, the night belonged to the Americans, and Japan's vaunted mastery of darkness was definitively broken. The battleship Fuso was torpedoed and sent to the depths by destroyers her crew never glimpsed. Japanese forces entered the straits piecemeal, only to be annihilated by radar-directed fire from ships they could not see. The Battle of Vela Gulf on August 6-7, 1943, laid bare the full mastery of American radar warfare. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger's 6 destroyers detected 4 Japanese destroyers carrying 950 troops at precisely 23:33. Using radar, the Americans closed to optimal torpedo range without ever revealing their presence. The outcome was devastating. 3 Japanese destroyers, Hagakaze, Arashi, and Kawakaze, were sunk, with 210 sailors and soldiers lost. American casualties, 0, not a single hit on a U.S. ship. Captain Tameichi Hara, commanding the sole surviving Japanese destroyer, Shigura, would later call it a perfect American victory. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz described the engagement as a little classic of naval warfare, a demonstration of how radar had completely upended the night combat advantage. On November 25, 1943, Captain Arleigh Burke's destroyer Squadron 23 repeated the feat at Cape St. George. Burke's Little Beavers detected 5 Japanese destroyers at Ohawan 41, tracked them undetected, and launched a devastating attack. 3 Japanese destroyers, Onami, Makanami, and Yugiri, sank, with 647 killed. American losses? None. Burke's after-action report was clinical. The entire engagement was conducted by radar plot. Visual contact was neither achieved nor required. This battle convinced Japanese naval leadership that night surface combat was no longer viable against radar-equipped American forces. It marked the last surface engagement of the Solomon Islands campaign and effectively ended Japan's attempts to use destroyers for night attacks. The scale of the technological gulf became stark when production figures were compared. Between 1942 and 1944, the United States produced 175 Fletcher-Class destroyers, approximately 1,000 SG radar sets, over 100,000 radar sets of all types, 250,000 cavity magnetrons. 2. 5 million radio tubes per month by 1944, and trained 50,000 radar technicians, investing $1.5 billion in radar development. Japan, by contrast, produced only 32 destroyers of all types, around 300 radar sets, 50,000 radio tubes per month at peak, and roughly 500 partially trained radar technicians with minimal investment in radar development. The disparity exceeded 50-to-1 in crucial areas. The United States alone produced more radar-equipped destroyers than Japan manufactured for all purposes. Each Fletcher-Class destroyer embodied industrial power that Japan could not hope to match for decades. Japanese naval training programs never successfully adapted to this new reality. 2 decades of night vision exercises, lookout schools, and optical range finding were rendered obsolete overnight, yet there was no replacement. The few Japanese radar sets that existed were primitive and unreliable. The Type 22 surface search radar, when it functioned, had less than half the capability of American SG radar. Crucially, it could not discriminate between multiple targets or direct, accurate gunfire. Using only an A-scope display that marked range as a single spike on a line, it could not match the revolutionary PPI display of the SG radar, which provided a comprehensive map-like view of all contacts. Training on these inferior sets proved counterproductive. Officers repeatedly experienced failures and reverted to visual methods despite their inadequacy. The waters around Guadalcanal, forever dubbed Ironbottom Sound for the ships resting on its seabed, became a grim laboratory in which radar warfare was perfected. Operational losses documented the evolution. August-September 1942, Japanese losses nearly equaled American. October-November 1942, Japanese losses doubled. December 1942, January 1943, they tripled. February 1943 onward, losses became catastrophic, while American casualties remained minimal. By the campaign's end, the Japanese had lost 40 destroyers in 16 months. The night fighting advantage that had defined Japanese strategy was irrevocably reversed, for the Imperial Japanese Navy, rooted in samurai tradition and the ethos of personal combat, this was not merely a tactical defeat, but a cultural catastrophe. The idea that technology could replace warrior skill contradicted the very foundation of Japanese military philosophy. Young officers, raised on tales of samurai valor, struggled to comprehend warfare in which the enemy was invisible and unreachable. The radar gap even challenged Japanese racial theories that had portrayed Americans as spiritually weak, dependent on technology because they supposedly lacked warrior courage. Japanese attempts to counter American radar revealed ingenuity, but also futility. Deploying window strips proved ineffective against sophisticated SG systems. Early electronic warfare efforts failed entirely. Japan lacked an industrial base capable of producing jamming equipment at meaningful scale. Tactical experiments, including special radar-absorbing paints, proved marginally effective at best. By mid-1944, the Naval Technical Department had effectively conceded the race. Matching American radar was impossible. The adoption of kamikaze tactics in October 1944 was a response to comprehensive defeat, not merely a measure against radar, signaling the culmination of Japan's technological and strategic collapse at sea. On October 19, 1944, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi organized the first official kamikaze unit at Mabalakat Airfield. His stated rationale was stark. With only 40 operational aircraft and inadequately trained pilots, conventional attacks were futile. Contemporary Japanese documents cite catastrophic pilot losses, training deficiencies, loss of air superiority, and severe resource shortages as the drivers of the kamikaze decision. Notably, radar disadvantage is absent from any official explanation. The first organized kamikaze attacks on October 25, 1944, coincidentally coincided with the Battle of Samar, yet were motivated by desperation over pilot quality and aircraft availability, not concerns about American radar. Statistical evidence from Pacific War destroyer engagements starkly illustrates radar's transformative impact. In the pre-radar era, Japanese destroyers lost 8 ships in night combat to 11 American losses, a modest exchange ratio of 1.4 to 1 favoring Japan. In the early radar era, November 1942 to June 1943, Japanese destroyers lost 19 ships to 7 American losses, an exchange ratio of 2.7 to 1, now favoring the United States. In the mature radar era, July 1943 to August 1945, Japanese losses skyrocketed to 47 destroyers, while Americans lost only 4, a staggering 11.8 to 1 ratio, favoring America. The technical specifications tell the story in cold detail. The American SG radar operated at 3 gigahertz with a 10-centimeter wavelength and 50 kilowatts of power, detecting destroyers at 15-plus nautical miles with plus 40 yards range accuracy and plus 0.5 degrees bearing precision, displayed on a revolutionary plan position indicator, PPI. Approximately 1,000 units were produced. In stark contrast, Japan's Type 22 radar operated at 150 megahertz with a 2-meter wavelength and only 2 kilowatts of power. Its effective range was 10 nautical miles, range accuracy plus 300 yards, bearing plus 5 degrees, and it displayed targets only on a simple A-scope. Production totaled roughly 300 units. The technological gap was not incremental. It spanned generations. American radars used magnetron tubes Japan could not manufacture reliably, integrated seamlessly with fire control systems, and continuously improved throughout the war. Even captured Japanese equipment highlighted the gap. Early in the war, Japanese forces obtained British cavity magnetrons but could not replicate them. Radar sets with Yagi antennas named after Japanese inventor Hidetsugu Yagi, whom their own military had ignored, went unrecognized for their significance. Post-war, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey interviewed Japanese naval officers who universally agreed radar had transformed naval warfare beyond Japan's ability to adapt. Officers admitted that by 1943, they understood the gap but suppressed this knowledge to maintain morale. The Battle of Cape St. George on November 25, 1943, epitomized the death of Japanese night-fighting supremacy. Captain Arleigh Burke's destroyer Squadron 23 executed a perfect radar-guided victory, sinking 3 Japanese destroyers without sustaining a single casualty. After this engagement, Japanese command orders effectively abandoned night destroyer actions, acknowledging that the night advantage now belonged entirely to the Americans. At the heart of this revolution was the MIT Radiation Laboratory. Established in November 1940 under Dr. Lee Dubridge, it grew to nearly 4,000 employees and designed half of all radar systems deployed by U.S. forces. Its work extended far beyond the SG radar, developing over 100 microwave systems valued at $1.5 billion in 1940s dollars. The foundation was the British cavity magnetron, delivered via the Tizard mission in September 1940, a single device producing 1 kilowatt at 10 centimeters wavelength, 100 times more powerful than existing technology. The Americans mass-produced this invention on a scale the Japanese could never match. 9 staff members of the laboratory would later win Nobel Prizes, yet their wartime contribution enabling the electronic revolution that transformed naval combat from visual engagement to radar-directed warfare was unparalleled. The radar revolution forced permanent changes in naval doctrine Every modern Navy now recognizes that electronic detection supersedes visual observation as the primary determinant in combat. The 1947 U.S. Naval War College study concluded that future naval engagements would hinge on electronic capabilities rather than seamanship alone. When the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force was established in the 1950s, its founding principles were built upon lessons from the radar war. Electronic warfare capability forms the foundation of naval power, with all other considerations secondary. Within the Imperial Japanese Navy, technical officers who grasped the implications of radar early were ignored. Few trained in electronics became prophets without honor, warning of inevitable defeat while being dismissed by commandos wedded to traditional doctrine. Their prescient analyses went unheeded, and the lessons of radar's dominance came at a devastating cost. The fatal disconnect between technical insight and operational doctrine sealed Japan's fate. While American forces wove radar into every facet of naval operations, Japanese commanders continued to plan night attacks based on visual range, even as their ships were obliterated from distances beyond sight. The measure of radar's impact is reflected starkly in the loss statistics. The reversal was absolute. Night combat, once Japan's domain, had become American dominance. The weapon Japan had honed over decades was turned against them by technology they could neither replicate nor counter. By the war's end, of the 70 modern destroyers Japan possessed at Pearl Harbor, only about a dozen remained operational. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once masters of the night, could no longer venture out after dark. Commander Tameichi Hara, the sole Japanese destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor to survive the entire war, captured this transformation in his memoir Japanese Destroyer Captain, published in 1961. Though it contains some factual errors, Hara's account remains the most comprehensive first-hand perspective on the radar war from the Japanese side. He fought in 16 major naval battles and witnessed the complete revolution of naval warfare. His ship, Amatsukaze, survived the November 13, 1942 battle despite severe damage from Helena's radar-directed guns. Hara later commanded Yahagi and finally the destroyer Shigura, surviving engagements where most of his fellow captains perished. In his memoir, he criticized Japanese leadership for failing to grasp the speed at which the enemy could develop new weapons and for never fully understanding the consequences of technological change. He lived to see the Imperial Navy's vaunted night-fighting supremacy utterly reversed by American radar. Admiral Raiso Tanaka, commander of the Tokyo Express runs, published his own assessment in 1956 in the U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings, Japan's losing struggle for Guadalcanal. He acknowledged that American radar had fundamentally changed naval warfare, rendering traditional Japanese night tactics obsolete. The radar war forced a profound philosophical reckoning within Japanese military culture. The core premise of Bushido, that spiritual and personal superiority could overcome material disadvantage, was shattered by oscilloscopes and magnetrons. Post-war Japanese military doctrine had to reconcile centuries of warrior culture with the reality of technological warfare. The lesson was unequivocal. In modern war, technology is supreme. Those who detect the enemy first win. Those who see farthest dominate. The final accounting of the radar war in the Pacific quantifies the revolution with stark clarity. Japanese destroyer losses in night surface combat: November-December 1942, 4, 1943, 31, 1944, 28, 1945, to August 14. American destroyer losses in night engagements: 1942, 3, 1943, 4, 1944, 1, 1945, 0. By 1944, the technological disparity was unbridgeable. American destroyers with effective radar, 175. Japanese destroyers with effective radar, 0. American radar range advantage, $200, 300%. Japanese night vision advantage, entirely negated. These numbers narrate a revolution in less than 2 years. The Imperial Japanese Navy, which had spent decades perfecting night combat, was defeated by technology that did not even exist when their training began. Fletcher-Class destroyers, armed with SG radar sets, achieved something unprecedented in military history. They completely nullified the enemy's primary tactical advantage through superior technology. Japanese night fighting expertise, carefully cultivated since 1904, was rendered obsolete by magnetrons and oscilloscopes, mass-produced in American factories. Commander Tameichi Hara's survival through 16 major battles gave him a unique vantage on this transformation. From commanding Amatsukaze at Guadalcanal, where he first confronted radar-directed fire, to commanding Shigura, the sole survivor at Vela Gulf, Hara witnessed the total reversal of naval warfare. The lessons he recorded underscore a fundamental truth. In the modern era, mastery of the night is no longer determined by courage or training. It belongs to those who wield technology with vision and precision. The Imperial Japanese Navy had entered the war with unwavering confidence that decades of night-fighting mastery would offset any American material advantage. Yet by the war's end, radar had proven a harsh and indisputable lesson. Technological superiority could utterly nullify human skill, training, and tradition. The Fletcher-Class destroyers, bristling with SG radar sets, did more than win the destroyer battles. They transformed naval warfare itself. Combat evolved from art to science, from reliance on human perception to electronic detection, from the hallowed rituals of warrior tradition to the cold precision of technology. The surviving Japanese officers understood a bitter truth. The era of visual naval combat had ended in the waters around Guadalcanal, replaced forever by a form of warfare that paid no heed to courage, honor, or the warrior spirit. They had once been masters of the night, honing their craft across decades of relentless training. In just 18 months, American radar had rendered that mastery obsolete, their expertise irrelevant, their tactical advantage a liability. The darkness that had been their greatest ally became a grave, and the Americans who wielded radar emerged as the undisputed lords of the night. The revolution was total, irreversible, and devastating. In the end, victory belonged not to skill, courage, or tradition, but to those who could see first, who could detect beyond human limits, and those who remained blind to technological change were condemned to defeat in the very darkness they had once ruled.